been 1 year since Meta stopped sharing Canadian news on its platforms. The move was in response to a government bill that forced web giants to pay news agency for journalism shared on their platforms. Meta didn't want to pay up, so they blocked news from Facebook and Instagram in Canada. Theresa Blackburn is the publisher of the River Valley Sun, a free newspaper that covers local news in Western New Brunswick. She is also the publisher of the magazine, Ageless NB, and she joins me now. Hello, Theresa, and thanks for being here.
Good evening, Brett.
So 1 year into Meta's news ban, what has the impact been on your publications?
It continues to be a problem. We used to do live hits on a regular basis going forward, whether it was in businesses to do advertising, but mostly it was live events, and people would pay us for that. And that was a huge help, to the tune of between $3,000 and $4,000. And that doesn't sound like a lot to some people, but that ends up being more than half of a summer student. That ends up being at least 2 months of our printing. It's huge to us. We are, operating on very small margins. We offer a free newspaper. It's free online and free in stores, and it's problematic. We had used Facebook as our web page, basically our only online presence for the first 4 years.
So how important was Facebook to your operation then? Given that you used it in that way, how crucial was it that you had access to that social media platform?
It was huge. We had to do a huge turnaround and outlay a huge chunk of change for a website. We lost our audience and had to work to regain that. It's not organic like it was. I liken it to losing the highway sign. When the Trans-Canada Highway went through most of Western New Brunswick, signs were a huge thing to try and get people off the highway. And we were right there on the highway, and now all of a sudden we're off the highway and we didn't have a sign to direct people. So it was crucial, and it remains, one of the biggest barriers to us growing.
So you've lost the eyeballs, you've lost engagement, you've had to spend extra money to build yourself a website, you've lost what you describe as the traffic sign. Yeah. Just how much of a financial impact has this had on your operation?
I don't know what last year would have been like. We have only been in business for 5.5 years. And so when we actually began, it was easy to do Facebook because it was free. And they had lovely monitoring programs related to the comments. So we could put in things, we could prevent people from commenting on our news from the courts, because that was always something that, you got to kick people while they're down, sadly. Sometimes, you've got those keyboard warriors. So now we have no community engagement on our website because we don't have the resources to kind of monitor that. So we've lost that community engagement related to online, the discussion that would happen online on a regular basis with Facebook. So we've lost a lot. And I feel like people have forgotten about that. And I feel like the government hasn't continued to knock on Meta's door to try and fix this. They've and Meta now, they looked at their numbers and they don't think it's worth, even kind of entering those discussions. Well, now we hear that they may be, going against what they've done or stopping what they're doing in Australia, because I know they were doing that there too.
Well, certainly this is ground zero, and perhaps there is a precedent being set here in Canada. The government, of course, is pointing the finger at Meta. Why wouldn't they? Accusing Meta of not wanting to engage constructively to reach a deal. But here we are, a year later. How optimistic are you that a deal is going to get done?
I'm not going to hold my breath, because I think I'd be passing out on the floor. We have had, the government say we're trying, and I applaud them for trying, but they tried too little too late. We have a CRTC right now that is saying we're not going to do any licenses for the next 2 years because we're going to try and deal with online streaming. Why now? That should have been done 10 years ago. They should have been trying to take Meta and Google to court, or at least legislate them long before, last year. We have a horse out of the stable. We're trying to the government is trying to install sprinklers in a burning building. That's what it feels like. And I applaud them for doing all of these things for us, or trying to do all of these things for us. But it really is sometimes too little, too late. We're waiting on Google funding. We're waiting, we waited for the LJI funding. The Local Journalism Initiative has helped us. We've got federal politicians who talk about helping media, and that's supposed to be a bad thing. The LJI program is $58.8 million, and that is 0.001 of the federal budget when you look at percentages. But yet it comes out of the federal politician's mouth on a regular basis that they don't want to pay for media. If you don't help us, we're going to disappear. And who else is going to be covering the town councils and the water issue stories? And when things happen like pride banners being banned in our downtown, we're the ones on the ground. Meta has an opportunity to not just say they're a good corporate citizen, but to be a good corporate citizen and help us, but they don't care. And federally, it feels like the federal government has just given up, and they can't. Facebook is still the most easiest way for us to get information disseminated, and they're preventing us from doing that because Meta won't come back to the table. The government needs to come back to the table too. They need to start knocking on the doors. They maybe need to do amendments to the legislation. They've got to do something for us, because it's the little guys like us that feed the bigger corporations like you. You guys can't be on the ground, but we're on the ground. And what happens is when we actually share that news, sometimes you guys pick that up, the globals, the CTVs, the CBCs of the world, the bigger players. And we have an important job to play.
Well, I can feel your passion. You paint a visceral picture of the impact this is having on your business, but we have to leave it there. Theresa Blackburn, publisher of the River Valley Sun, thank you for being here.
Thank you for caring.
It's been 1 year since Canadians have been blocked from seeing news content on Instagram and Facebook. Meta introduced the ban in response to the government's Online News Act, an act that is meant to force web giants to compensate media outlets for journalism shared on their platforms. Google and the federal government ultimately reached a $100 million deal, but Meta resisted, and now they block all news from their platforms, a change that has had devastating consequences for many local outlets this past year.
I'm just tired. I'm tired of feeling like we've been forgotten about. I'm tired of people telling us, we're trying to get you there, we're trying to get you there. And we're like hanging on, like one finger now on the edge of the cliff.
It's quite dramatic, the difference between the impact on local and national, with very few exceptions.
The Thursday Power Panel is here to discuss the Online News Act 1 year in. James Moore is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP Cabinet Minister, and Stevie O'Brien is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers. Hello everybody, and thanks for being here today. We just heard from Theresa Blackburn that the Liberals are installing sprinklers on a burning building with this, that it's too little, too late, and that her business is suffering. Stevie, do you think the Liberals see this as a success, this initiative? We can't hear you. You may be on mute, Stevie. Okay, let's go to James on that one, and we'll get back to Stevie if we can. James.
I mean, it's not a success. It doesn't really matter what the Liberals think of it. The reality is the reality, which is that matters have gotten worse for small players, for creators, for the consumer, most importantly, who are looking for diversified sources of news. There have been multiple times in recent history, whether it was the rise of Donald Trump, COVID, federal election campaigns, issues that have come and gone, where people in our own social circles on Meta, on Facebook, have shared news stories, and sometimes it disappoints us, or it inspires us, or it angers us, or inspires us, or annoys us. But that social fabric of people sharing news, sharing information, pointing out things that might be interesting to their group of friends and their clusters of colleagues, and that's now been taken away as a consequence, not of Facebook's doing, but of government policy. And I think Canada has been made poorer for it. Information sharing has been made poorer for it. Social interaction over news information has been lessened as a consequence of that. So I think it's a fail. I think the Liberals are saying that they want to fix the assumed problem of loss of ad revenue because advertisers want to go to where the eyeballs are, and trying to sort of scoop up that money and spread it around in sort of some equalization formula. But the reality is it doesn't work. And if Meta doesn't want to play by the government's rules, they don't have to, and they don't have to open themselves up for that liability of being a tax revenue middleman for the government to spread around through government programs to those who create content. It's not what Meta has to do. They're not forced to do this. They're being put in the middle here by government policy that's not working.
Well, Stevie, I think we can hear you now. What do you make of that position? Is this just a failure?
I don't think so. I think that they have successfully extracted or come to a deal with Google for $100 million a year, which is going to support the Canadian news and journalism sector. I think that it's disingenuous to say these platforms cannot pay this money. They are making billions of dollars, money hand over fist, on the content of these Canadian news creators. The Trudeau government cares about journalism in a way that I don't think we'll see if there's a change in administration. So I think the time to have this fight is now. I think we need to stand our ground, and I think the government's doing the right thing.
Andrew, what do you make of James's point that the government basically just can't coerce Facebook into a deal if they don't want to? They can't force Facebook to put news on their platforms if they don't want to. So what can the government do if Meta doesn't want to come to the table and play ball?
Well, this has always been the problem with the proposal that the Liberals had, was this assumption that everybody would just come to the table, play ball, and somehow that this money that is being generated even through the Google deal was actually going to make a difference and support those content creators who are suffering. I'm much less sympathetic than James is to Facebook's plight in this. I think that they are very much part of the problem. But on the other hand, this is a market. And I think that we need to understand that this is a chase for advertising revenue. And it's very hard to see how on any of the metrics that the Liberal policy has been a success over the last year. Canadians have less access to information. The hollowing out of the media continues across the newsrooms of the country. It's just not seen to be in any way, shape, or form a solution that's worked. And I think that means they either need to drop it or go back to the drawing boards and figure out some better way to deal with this.
Now, I should point out that we invited Heritage Minister Pascale St-Onge to appear on the show today. She was not available, but we do have a statement from her. She says, quote, Facebook must act responsibly and unblock news on its platform, end quote. She has accused Meta of not engaging constructively in this process. Stevie, what do you make of her response?
I think that she's right. I think that they are not coming to the table. They're shirking their responsibility to be responsible corporate citizens. And I'd also say to the other points raised so far, like, Canada's not alone in this. We're not the only country attempting very similar legislation. And I think that this is the time to have the fight. New Zealand, Australia have put things into place. There's something that the United States is contemplating as well. And I think if we stand up and take collective action and the countries stand up together, if government cannot stand up towards these trillion-dollar companies, nobody has a chance.
Well, James, on that point, I mean, Canada is a sovereign state. The federal budget is $500 billion. There's a Justice Department building down the road from here that's filled with lawyers. Is there not something more that can be done to solve this problem?
Well, the problem, quotes. Look, Stevie's rhetoric right there, I think, demonstrates what the Liberals really want, right? They want to be able to seem to be taking on, Mark Zuckerberg in his worst iterations as people see him, and the worst sort of interpretations of him and the evil multi-billion-dollar international corporations, and take them on. Like, what great sin has Facebook caused here and created? The irony of all this, by the way, with regard to government policy, is that Canadians, through the Crown Corporation known as the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, on which we are airing right now, Canadians have created a national pan-Canadian platform in multi-languages in order to share information and content. And we put hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into this platform so that news and information can be shared all across this continental nation in multi-languages. And historically, people have thought that's a good thing. That's an important thing, to have this great platform that we can share information, news, content, and stories about. But the private sector creates one. And now all of a sudden we need to regulate them and take away the profits and redistribute those profits. Again, that's a bad thing. And Facebook just says, that's fine if that's the policy that you want to pursue. But we don't want to play in that game. And if you were on the board of directors of Facebook or Meta, and the government came to you and said, you can share information on our platform, but you're going to have to skim some of the ad revenue off of that, and you're going to have to distribute that around. And Facebook would say rightfully to the government of Canada, well, how much? How much liability are we talking about? How much sharing would we have to do? And because the government has been ill-defined in its process about what the revenue sharing looks like, Meta just says, we're not going to play in this game until we come to a more rational solution. And maybe one can be found. But the idea of punching up and beating up Facebook because they're an easy target because Mark Zuckerberg.
But they're not an easy target though. They're not an easy target, and just to push back on that argument a little bit, but look, other sectors are taking these steps. The Europeans have taken to antitrust and pro-privacy regulation. The U.S. has resorted to litigation. The Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit against Google, alleging the company has, quote, corrupted legitimate competition in the ad tech industry. So it's not like this is unique to Canada. These battles are happening.
Yeah, so Meta, taking a responsible corporate decision, just says, not knowing what the liability could be in terms of what this revenue sharing might look like, we're just opting out of this conversation. And maybe a solution can be found because Canadians benefit when news and information is shared, as is the ethos and the argument in favor of the existing CBC.
I want to move on.
But the idea that they've created some great sin here because they're looking out for their interests is wrong.
Andrew, your response to that.
I do love that James thought there was a great value in public broadcasters and supporting that sort of stuff. Just going to take a note of that for.
Andrew, your response to that argument. Let's get Andrew a second to get in there.
I always like it when these guys have their argument.
Passion.
There's a lot of it. Again, I understand why Facebook has acted the way it did. I think the government has picked an odd set of tools to try to deal with a very curious problem around ad revenue. They've not really figured out what they want to do in terms of supporting local media, how best to do that. They've certainly not looked to, to James's argument, to the CBC as a means of expanding and improving local coverage. I mean, those are all kind of frozen in time. And I think that this is one of the problems where the tool that the government had, whether it was well-meaning or not, at the time I didn't think it was going to make much sense to do it. But the fact that they've got this tool in place, it's obviously had the opposite effect of what it was intended to. It's not moving money to the local companies. It's not providing Canadians with access to better quality news locally. And in fact, it's doing exactly the opposite. I don't know why, other than some kind of a hard-headedness on the part of the Liberal government, why they're continuing down this path, rather than looking at the big tools to deal with the oligopolies that are in place at Google and Meta, and figure out what other tools are available without this kind of perversion of the market to impact local news.
Stevie, I could see you shaking your head when James was arguing against taking some of these other actions. What do you make of that?
No, I think I didn't mean to go against them. I just think that, sure, every tool in the toolbox we should look. We should look at whether there are antitrust cases that should be brought. We should look at our Competition Act and what the implications should be there. I don't think we should continue to allow these American tech giants to go and take the attention economy. We are the product. They're taking our clicks and they're monetizing our attention, and they're not paying their fair share for the Canadian eyeball time that they're getting and the content that's being created by Canadians.
James, last word to you. 30 seconds.
Facebook has committed the sin of creating a digital platform that people really like to use and want to share information on it. And the government wants a taste and they want a piece of it. And they want to redistribute it and play politics with it and attack a billionaire. That's what they want to do. And so the solutions that they've come up with, to Andrew's point, are rudimentary, inefficient, and don't work. Whether something else can be mediated, maybe, I suppose. But the idea of just attacking this company that's committed the sin of creating a platform that people like to use to share information and going after them and beating them up, I think is very wrong-headed. All
right, we've got to leave it there. I want to thank our power panel for this passionate debate: James Moore, Andrew Thompson, and Stevie O'Brien.